Today's shiur begins at the second line from the end of Daf Nun Zayin Omid Beis. You will notice a triangle, Omar Romi Bar Chamo, but before we begin the Gemara, let us take note of the Nosei Mivneh structure. You notice that a bow tie appears. These are nisyonos, these are attempts laha'amid hanoisei shel yesh chupa lepsulos kemachloikis tanoim. The topic that we discussed at the end of our previous shiur, starting actually from the top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis, the issue of is there halachic strength to a chuppah done with a kohen and someone that is posel to him. That, of course, was the subject of our previous shiur, and of course, in order to appreciate that more, we recommend being familiar with our Daf Yomi shiur of Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Triangles will appear in our attempt to set up the issue of Yesh Chupal B'Psulus K'Machloikis Tanoim. We'll have an attempt to keep track of the give and take. So, with the triangle facing upwards, that indicates the point we're trying to make, and the inverted triangle will be a rejection. For those who are not familiar with Yesh Chupal B'Psulus or not, which we saw before as a Machlokis Rav and Shmuel, we glance at the Rashi at the top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Yesh Chupal B'Psulos Kohen Gadol Shichnis Almona Bas Kohen L'Chupa V'Lo Ba Le'al. Kohen Gadol is not allowed from the Torah to marry a widow. Let us say he met a widow that was the daughter of a Kohen. Now, a daughter of a Kohen is entitled to eat from Truma unless she becomes disqualified. What would make her disqualified? So, an example of that would be a forbidden type of intimacy that would ruin her status, make her into a halola, and she could not continue partaking of the truma of her father's house. In our sugya, we're not dealing with intimacy, but rather with the bringing of the woman who is unfit to the kahuna under a marriage canopy. We continue now with today's shiur, second line from the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Omar Romi Bar Chamo. Yesh Chupa Lepsulos. The issue that we saw was a machlokis Rav and Shmuel. Bonu lemachlokis Rabbi Meir on the one hand, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon on the other hand. It would be of great use and value to glance back at the Mishnah on Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis, on the lower part of the page. We saw a Mishnah featuring a forbidden kahuna type relationship. An almana to a kohen gadol, a grusha or a chalutza to a kohen hedyot. From the point that they enter erusin, so they are not to partake of truma. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon allow. So what do we see there? We see kiddushin is done between a kohen and a woman that's forbidden to him. The Tanakama, Rabbi Meir, generally speaking, when you have a Tanakama and there's no name, you can assume it's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is opposed to her eating of truma, and Rabbi Elazar and Shimon are nonplussed by that, and she is able to continue eating from truma if she is, for example, the daughter of a kohen, and if if her marriage, as we indicated in the Mishnah, is a marriage to a kohen, so they would allow her to partake of truma through her husband, who was makadesh her by virtue of his being kinyan kaspo, meaning even if she wasn't a bas kohen, which would have entitled her to eat truma from her father's house, she will be entitled to eat truma because a kohen betrothed her. So now the names that the Gemara just cited, Rabbi Meir on the one hand versus Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other, we just noted from the Mishnah on Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis. And now we continue with the Gemara's analysis at the top of Nun Ches Amud Aleph. The Rebbe Meir, the Omar Kiddushin Pasli, according to Rebbe Meir that we cited as the Tanakama on Yevamos base, that says by the Kohen Gadol giving the Almona money in betrothal, she becomes ruined, disqualified from Truma consumption. Chuppah Nami Pasla. Chuppah also will render her unfit to partake of Truma. The Rebbe Lozer of Rabbi Shimon, the Amri Kiddushin Lo Pasli, Chuppah Nami Lo Pasla. According to these two authorities, Rebbe Lozer and Shimon, just like we saw there on Nun Vav Beis, that the betrothal, the offering of marriage money to her, did not disqualify her from Truma consumption, so too, standing under the marriage canopy with the Kohen, who is unfit for her, it will not disqualify her. The Gemara here rejects this paralleling and this analysis. Notice we have a long marking. This is a dechia, a rejection. Umimai. Who is to say as we did? Tilmo ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Meir hasam. It could be that Rabbi Meir said what he did, and that's over there that he disqualifies her. Elo bekidushin dekoni la. That's as a result of the man giving her money, the giving of marriage money from a man to a woman, that affects a deal, a transaction, an acquisition takes place. Avol chuppah delo koni la lo, but chuppah is not the means of acquiring a wife. It's used to consummate a marriage, to complete the nisuin, but it's not the method of initial acquisition. So maybe it's not as serious, and it wouldn't disqualify her. Inami, alternatively, ad kan lo klamri Rebbe Lozer Rabbi Shimon Hassam, they took the lenient approach over there, where it didn't passel ela b'kiddushin. It's only there and that's with regard to the Kohen Gadol offering the widow money, the lo krevi labia. It's not close, it's not near the intimacy. There's a waiting period between, in the time of the Gemara I should say, because nowadays we don't have this, but in the time of the Gemara there was a pause, a passage of time between the initial Kiddushin and the eventual Nisuin, the consummation through intimacy. So Kiddushin wasn't close to Bia. Avol Chuppah de Kreva Labia, from the point that a couple stands under a marriage canopy until they engage in actual intimacy, it's a very short while, so it's very close to Bia, and Bia certainly would disqualify, a Bia Surah would disqualify the woman from partaking of Truma. So Chuppah, which is close to Bia, Hachinami de Pasla, they, Rebbe Lozer Shimon, would say that it will disqualify her. Elo, notice another triangle, another attempt to set up the issue of Yesh Chuppah L'Psus and Machlokas Tanoim. We see here, Elo I'ika L'Meimar Beplukta Tahani Tanoim. If there is any room to suggest that there's a Machlokas Tanoim, then it would be like the following: Desanya Nisu Zu Vazu Ksheros Upsulos. Nisu is a word that's a little hard to translate in our sugya, but we'll say it's a completion of marriage, a consummation of marriage. Ksheros and psulos, that means the couple is unfit to marry one another. O she nichnasu l'chuppah v'lo nivalu. We're only translating now. The Gemara will have to clarify this source. Or they entered a marriage canopy without actual intimacy. Oichlois mishaloi ve'oichlois betruma. The husband must provide his new wife with sustenance, with food, and if the man is a Kohen, so she will eat truma. Now the Gemara interrupts this Tanaic source with the need for clarification. After the brackets, the source itself continues. The Gemara asks or points out nichnesu. The word nichnesu l'chuppah implies michlal de nisu Nis'u mamish. That Nis'u means actual intimacy for the purpose of consummating the marriage. Could that possibly be? Could, as a result of a puzzle having intimacy with the woman, would she be qualified for eating truma? How could this Tanakh source say oichlos b'truma? So it can't be mamish. The Rashi on the fourth line from the top points this out. Michlal denisu mamish b've'ila. B've'ila means intimacy. B'tmiha, with wonderment you read this. V'chibia b'psula mi'ikol amadamar dalo pasla mitruma debei nasha. The intimacy with someone that's unfit. Let's say, like we had the example before, Kohen Gadol engages in intimacy with an almona that was the daughter of a Kohen. Would anyone say that would not disqualify her? Ela pirushe kamefaresh. The understanding of the source is that the opening is not a distinct, separate case from the second line of the source, but rather the second line of the source explains the opening of the source. Nisu Ketzad, what does Nisu mean? So now we read that in the Gemara. We continue. Ela Lav, in the Gemara text, you have to say that the second line of this text is an explanation of the opening. Meaning the word nisu at the beginning of the source. What does nisu mean? It means marriage. And how is that expressed? Through standing under a chuppah without the intimacy. And the Tanakhama says they are entitled to continue eating truma if she's the daughter of a Kohen, or if he is a Kohen and she's a Bas Yisrael, this will enable her to partake of truma, even though we're dealing with an illegal, illicit type relationship. What do we see from here? That chuppah does not disqualify. Chuppah lo pasla. Rabbi Shmuel ben Oisha, Rabbi Yochanan Berger Omer, kol shebi asa machilasa. Any situation where, as a result of intimacy, she would be entitled to eat, chupasa machilasa. So too, the canopy will enable her to eat. V'chol she'ein bi'asa machilasa chupasa ein again. V'chol she'ein bi'asa machilasa ein chupasa machilasa. And if you have a situation where the bia would render her unfit, she would not be able to eat as a result of the intimacy. So too, the chuppah will disqualify her. So what do we see here? Very simply, the idea of yesh chuppah lepsulos, does the chuppah with a couple, a Kohen couple that's puzzle, have an effect? According to the Tanakhama, no. According to Rabbi Shmuel, yes. The Gemara says, Mimai, who says that this is the parallel? Dilma, Rabbi Shmuel ben Oisha, Rabbi Yochanan Berger, Rabbi Meir Svirale. Maybe Rabbi Shmuel, who represented the strict opinion, holds like Rabbi Meir, Diomar Kiddushin lo achla. Not that it's as a function of the Kiddushin, it's the acquisition of the wife, that the husband acquiring his wife, that rendered her unfit. But not that the chuppah apostles. The Gemara responds to that. Hi. Kol she'ein biyasa machilasa ein chuppah machilasa. If that pshat, the rejection pshat, were correct, then the language shouldn't be as it was. Rather, kol she'ein biyasa machilasa ein kaspa machilasa mibayale. Kaspa is the initial kiddushin money that's given. So that if Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosha or Rabbi Yochanan Berger was holding like Rabbi Meir, he should have said halacha in the spirit of Rabbi Meir, with a reference or an emphasis on kiddushin. Kaspa is the money given. That's what miboyale it should have said. The Gemara says that does not convince us. Dilma Ivy Omar Tanakama chuppah. Maybe since the Tanakama used the term chuppah, Omar Ihu Nami Chuppah. He also chose to use the word chuppah, but really it's a reference to kaspa, making Rabbi Shmuel ben Oshim ben Roka holding like Rabbi Meir that it's the kiddushin that passes and not the chuppah. We continue with the topic of chuppah l'psulos, though this is a new trend of thought, hence we have a slash mark before Rav Amram. Before we continue with the Gemara itself, let us glance at the side under the nosei, the topic heading. Rav Amram b'shem Rav Sheshes Omer Shegam Hatana Soiver Diyesh Chuppah L'Psulos. Rav Amram will say in the name of Rav Sheshes that there is a Tana that holds Yesh Chuppah L'Psulos. Umenase Lahichiach Ezeh Mi Mishnah B'Soita. He attempts to show that from a Mishnah in Maseches Soita. In the Gemara text itself, we've noted a long point. The Gemara will go through several stages in order to show how the Tana feels that way, and we've noted this with a double star in the other margin. Simanu kinekuda aruka hadi amar v'tana tuna shloisha shlovim kidei laharois she'atana oimer yesh chuppah l'psulos. So what we've presented so far is the structure of the Gemara. With we should note there's another mivneh note, a house marking that appears. The house marking will appear in two directions. This is a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of the back and forth style of the Gemara. They represent, as we've written on the side, hesberim, explanations, kidei levarer hapshat b'mishnah b'soita, in order to clarify the explanation of the Mishnah in Maseches Sota, likras hoichacha diyesh chuppah l'psulos, in anticipation, in leading up to the opinion that there is chuppah l'psulos. The inverted house marking indicates a rejection of what is attempted to be said. Now, before we can get into the Gemara, maybe we'll read the first two lines of the Gemara itself. In the middle of the Omid Omar of Amram, Ha Milsa Omar Lon Rav Sheshes. The following is something Rav Sheshes told us. Ve'an harinhu la'ainin mimasnisin, and he has enlightened our eyes from a Mishnah. And what does Rav Sheshes say? Yesh chuppah l'psulos. As we've seen already today in our shir and in our previous shir, that by a Kohen bringing a woman that's unfit for him in marriage under a marriage canopy, that would have halachic ramifications. And in the examples that we've been using in our Gemara, it had to do with the woman becoming disqualified from truma consumption. V'tana tuna, and the Tana bears this out. The Mishnah that's quoted is, as we indicated from Maseches Soita, a husband who suspects his wife of foul play, and he warns her not to be with so and so, and he specifies an individual. And if it is revealed by witnesses that she went into private, we don't know what took place between the woman and her boyfriend, but we have witnesses that tell us that she went into private. So the husband of that woman brings her to the Beis Hamikdash, and there is a ritual or a procedure that takes place that enables us to determine whether she is guilty of actual immorality, of actual intimacy with the other fellow, with the paramour, or not. In the course of that ritual, she swears that she did not do the sin. And the text that we have now in the Gemara is a quote from that section. Amen shelo sotisi arusa unesua shemeres yavam uknusa. Amen is the acceptance of an oath that she did not go astray. Sotisi, to go astray, is to have intimacy with the paramour, not as an arusa, not as a nesua, not as a shomeres yavam, nor as a knusa. The terms are going to be dealt with by the Gemara itself, so we're not going to translate. Hi arusa hechidomi. When the woman is swearing that she did not go astray as an arusa, what does that mean? Ilema dekoni law kishi arusa v'istatra. And here, the first word online is a very tricky word. Koni in this case means to warn her. Kinui and stira, these are terms that are common or particular to the topic of sota. Kinui is where the husband warns her. Stira is another word. It means going into private. Seser is something secret or in private. So, does this mean when she swears that she did not go astray as an arusa, does that mean that the husband had warned her while she was an arusa to him? Meaning he had given her money, we say he betrothed her, but hadn't actually consummated the marriage yet. Is that the case, that he warned her while she was an arusa v'istatra, and she went into private with another man after the warning, v'kamashke lo kishi arusa, and he brings her to the Beis Hamikdash to drink from the special waters that will prove her status? That can't be. Arusa bas mishtihi, is an arusa subject to this ritual, mishtas, to the drinking. V'hatanan, we have another Tanaic source that says arusa v'shemeres yavam loy shoysos v'loy noitlas ksuba. A woman who is an arusa, she's betrothed to a man, or she's waiting for a yibum marriage, they don't drink. There's a pasuk in the topic of sota that says tachasi sheikh, that she has to be under her husband, under the rubric of a consummated marriage, which is called nisuin. It's too early in the game for her to be subjected to the drinking. So an arusa doesn't drink, nor does a shomeres yavam. And if there are witnesses that she had been in private with someone, and she had been warned, and she had been in private, she will not get a ksuba. She caused her own disqualification or her own forbidding to her husband. A married woman who does misbehave in this sense is intimate with another man, so she has to leave her husband if it's under willing circumstances. In other words, if her immorality was with her approval, as opposed to a case of a rape, other than with a wife of a kohen, which there's a different rule. But the main point, an arusa does not drink. So what does the source mean when she swears that I didn't go astray as an arusa? Ella dekoni la kishi arusa ve'istatra ve'komashkela kishi nisua. He had warned her while they were still in a state of erusin. She went into private, but the drinking didn't take place until after her becoming a nesua. So the Gemara asks, could this sequence of events have led to a drinking? Omi badki lo mai, would the water have checked her out under these circumstances? What did we describe? We described a man who had the wife in the arusa stage. She went off with some other man in private. We don't know what happened there. And then he continued living with her. The husband, that is, continued and consummated the marriage with her. But he shouldn't have done that. She was, technically speaking, forbidden to him. The husband's being with her after she had been in private with another man and having received a warning against that, she is forbidden to her husband. So a husband that takes his wife to drink when he himself has done something errant, the water does not check. The pasuk says, "V'nika ha'ish me'avoin," and the man is cleansed from his sin. Bisman sho'ish menuka me'avon, and the drasha on this is that when the husband is free from sin, hamayim boikim esisha, then the water will check out his wife. We didn't explain before, maybe some of you are familiar with the procedure that a woman who is found to be who is guilty, so the water causes her to swell. It's something of a miraculous nature that took place in the Beis Hamikdash. The water will work only if the man is sin-free vis-a-vis these matters. However, ein ho'ish menuka me'avon, if the husband is not free from sin, as would be the case over here, where after going into private he continued to consummate his marriage with her, well, ein hamayin boikim as ishtoi, the water wouldn't check her out to begin with. So that can't be the case featured in Maseches Soita, where she accepts upon herself by oath that she was not wayward. Ella, so what must be the explanation of the source at the beginning of our long point? Dekoni lo kishi arusa vistatra. The husband had warned her while they were still in the state of erusin, and she went into private, and then with that other man, and witnesses can tell us that they went into private, and at that point she becomes usher to her husband. V'nichnasa lechupa v'lo nivala, and she had entered the marriage canopy with her husband, but no intimacy. See, without the intimacy, the water can still check. And what we see here is that the other requirement is also met. She's called tachas isheich. She's considered under the control, under the rubric of her husband. Ushma mino, and from this we see, from the fact that he's able to cause her to drink the water, the sota water, after having only reached the chuppah stage, that indicates yesh chuppah lepsulos. The woman here is not fit for him. She's psulot him, because after having gone into private, she becomes also to her husband, and she went into private before the chuppah, so she was psulot to her husband. She's unfit to her husband, and yet the chuppah takes effect. It enables the drinking to take place, a fulfillment of tachas ishech, under your husband, literally translated. So this is the point, that the concept of yesh chuppah l'psulus, albeit this doesn't have anything to do with the issue of becoming disqualified from truma consumption, but you see the power of chuppah, even though it is with psulos. Omar Rava v'tizbra. Now you notice the inverted house marking, so this is a rejection. On the side of the Gemara, we have a mivneh, because a new shape is going to appear, the trapezoid shape. This is a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a give and take style. The inverted trapezoid represents kushios. HaGemara makshet. The Gemara will ask, shehamokar b'soita einoi samchuti loy metartzosa. The source from sota that was used for making the point is not reliable. It's not metartzos. It's not straight. It's not smooth. And you can't prove from a source that's unreliable a point of law. In our case, to come to the halachic conclusion that yesh chuppah from a source that's not reliable. The trapezoid, or volcano shape with the narrow part facing up, represents chuvos, responses. attempts to show that the source is reliable. He mitartzosa. That's the lashon of the Gemara. The expression of the Gemara is that it's mitartzosa. It's straight. It's smooth and reliable. Ba'amud beis likras soif hamahalach, on the nun chesed beis, toward the end of this sequence, ha-Gemara tavi shloisha drachim shemesumonos 1 through 3 belimud hamokor besoita. So, which basically means that the Gemara will show in 3 different paths, 3 different ways, or 3 different angles, how you can read the source from Masechah Sota, making the source reliable. The Gemara. Now we turn to the Gemara. Omar Rava v'tizbra dehamet hartzosahi. Is the Sota source reliable? V'ha ki asa Rabbi Acha bar Chanina midroma. When Rabbi Acha came from the south, also v'aisi masnisi b'yodei, he came with a Tanaic source in hand, and the pasuk says mi baladei ishech. This pasuk is also from the context of Sota. And what do we learn from that expression mi baladei ishech? Mi shekodma Shchivas Baal Leboyel. The framework in which the Sota ritual can take place hinges upon, or is dependent upon, the woman having had intimacy at first with her husband. In other words, Shchivas Baal, that's literally lying with her husband, intimacy with her husband would have had to precede any wayward act, any intimacy with someone else. However, if the intimacy with the paramour precedes intimacy with husband, so then the framework for the Sota ritual is lacking. That having been said, so what we described before as Amein Shelo Sotisi Arusin, how did we explain that? That he warned her, the husband warned her while she was an Arusa, and she went into private, and at that privacy, it could very well be, in fact, intimacy with the paramour, but all this time, there had been no intimacy yet with the husband. So the explanation we gave for Arusa doesn't conform to the framework in which Sota operates, because the description we gave before, just to repeat ourselves, demonstrates or illustrates a case where Kodma Shchivas Boyel, the paramour, would have had intimacy before the husband. Omar Romi Bar Chama Mishtachas Law, we can preserve our original explanation and have the Shchivas HaBaal before the Boyel, Kegoin Shebo Oleo Arusa Beveis Aviha. While she was still an Arusa, before the privacy, that's an important point, so there's no issue of sin. Before her going into privacy with the paramour, the husband had intimacy with the betrothed wife while she was still in her father's house, because the betrothal period, the Erusin period, is understood as a time during which the woman is getting ready to consummate her marriage, and all that time she's living in her father's house. So the Orus had gone to her house where she was living in her father's domain, and had intimacy with her, and there's no, we'll say, sin per se, no Torah level sin in his having intimacy with her after he betrothed her. So you have then Kodma Shchivas HaBaal Laboel, and the source is reliable. We should point out that in order for her to be Tachas Ishech, then the chuppah would have had to take place, and that would be then the resuscitation of our point of Yesh Chuppah L'Psulos. The Gemara asks, though, to say that that's what took place by the Arusa. In order to say that, you'll have to maintain a parallel with the other example in that source. In the source it described Arusa. She says, Omein Shelo Sotisi Arusa, Nesua. She also says, Shemeres Yavam. Shemeres Yavam is the widow waiting for the levirate marriage to her brother-in-law. The Kavosoga Shemeres Yavam. To, as we say, to keep the parallel in the original source, using this explanation, you would have to say, Shebo Oleha Yavam Beveis Chamiha, that the Yavam, the brother-in-law that's going to marry her, had relations with her while she was not yet, well, she was literally in her father-in-law's house, namely in the house of her deceased husband, or in her father-in-law's house, if you will, prior to her coming to the Yavam mamish, literally, or I should say fully. Now, could that possibly be the pshat? Does that fit into the words that the Yavam had intimacy with her before the paramour? If that were the case, you wouldn't use the term Shemeres Yavam. The Gemara at the top of Amud Beis, Shemeres Yavam Koris La. If a Yavam had intimacy with her, you wouldn't call her Shemeres Yavam, waiting for the Yavam. Ishtoi Ma'al Yahi. A Yavam that has intimacy, even if it's not with the marriage intent, but he had intimacy with her, that doesn't matter. She becomes his wife in a full sense. This is a reference to a Gemara that we had on Daf Nun Vav. Rav described the less than fully intended intimacies described in that previous sugya, even though they're intimacies that don't have full yibum intention, nevertheless they acquire in the fullest sense to make her, the Yevama, the Yavam's wife. So to describe Kodma Shchivas Ayavam, Beveis Avi Chamiha, in her father-in-law's house, that wouldn't be an accurate explanation of the term Shemeres Yavam. So the Gemara responds, no, the source is okay, Kishmuel, because we are learning in accordance with Shmuel, that it's not a real kinyan, a full acquisition, that kind of intimacy, an intimacy where it's the shem znus, where it's not with yibum intent. So therefore she can still be described as a shemeres yavam. And again, with that we preserve the explanation of Arusa, or Kodma Shchivas Habal, because he was Bala Bebeis Aviyah. The Gemara says back, Midi hu taima el Rav, but our entire discussion right now is, we'll say, within Rav. Ha'omar Rav, let us just remind ourselves that it was Rav that says Yesh Chupul Psulos. So there's this whole sugya of Rav Amram saying that Rav Sheshes holds Yesh Chupul Psulos, and the Tana supports that. This ultimately is all for the sake of supporting Rav. So to say that we're learning according to Shmuel would be out of bounds. So we continue back in the Gemara. Midiu time el Rav. Is it not so that our whole discussion is for the benefit of Rav? Ho'omar Rav konala koil. Rav says that a bias nus that a yavam has with the yavama, like we just described, where he's bo'alel bebeis chamiha, would make her a full-fledged wife, and you wouldn't use the term shemeres yavam. The Gemara answers, Hocha b'mayaskinon Kagain di Ovad Bo Maimer Ubeis Shammai He. Now here there's a very big turn, and it's not in the words of the Gemara, but thanks to Rashi we can see this. At this point the issue of Kodma Shchivas Habal is jettisoned, is released. We're not fixated on that. So we're not makbid on Kodma Shchivas Habal. So we we have to start with a new frame of mind. So what is the case of Shemeres Yavam, and she's still called Shemeres Yavam? Well, he gave her money. The Yavam gave her money, and according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, when a Yavam gives the Yavama money, Ubeis Shammai Diyama Maimer Koine Kinyan Gomor. Now, as far as the issue of Kodma Shchivas Habal, which was based on Exeris HaKosuf, we had Mibaladei Sheikh. So Rashi explains the first husband was with her as husband and wife already, and understand that the Yavam essentially is only a continuation of his deceased brother. So you have this element of Kodma Shchivas Habal, and the Yavam had given her money. With the giving of money, so she is called Tachas Isheich. So you have all of the necessary elements without the husband, the Yavam, that is, having done any act of intimacy with her. So then the source, we can keep the original explanation of Arusa is the Kodma Shchivas Habal was Bebeis Avia. The Yavam is this source is according to Beis Shammai, where Maimer was done, so it's Tachas Isheich, and the first husband had already been with her, so you have Kodma Shchivas Habal. Everything so far is so good. The Gemara continues. Ihachi, if the case of the Shemeres Yavam is where he simply gave her money and there was no intimacy, Hainu Arusa, it's then redundant. That's the same thing as an Arusa, where the man gave her money. And you don't have repeat in Tanaic sources. So the Gemara answers, Uletamech, Nesua Uknusa, Lav Chada Milsahi, the term Nesua that appeared in the source, is it not the same as Knusa? Knusa what's Nesua? Nesua is where the husband and wife consummated their marriage with an act of intimacy. Knusa is where the Yavam consummated his marriage with the Yavama with an act of intimacy. So, are you going to say that there's a problem there? That Nesua and Knusa are one thing and it's being repetitive? Ela Nesua Didei Uknusa de Chavrei. The terms, though they're very similar in terms of acts, Nesua refers to a man consummating the marriage with his own wife, with the woman with whom he initiated the marriage. Uknusa de Chavrei means that's the Yavam consummating the marriage with, Chavrei means his brother's wife, of course under mutter circumstances. So that as far as the terms Nesua and Knusa, there's no redundancy. They're describing different types of marriage consummations. Hachanami arusadi de'v'shemeres yavam dechavrei. With regard to the giving of money seemingly repeated, no. Arus is where the man gave money to his own wife, his own betrothal. And shemeres yavam is where the yavam gives money to the wife of his brother, his deceased brother. That's the Chavrei, his deceased brother. So far, we're numbering this as number one, as the first resolution of the source of, and with that in mind, we mentioned before, or actually our note, we didn't read it, but we suggested that with this then, that the attempt to say Tana Tuna can be preserved. Namely, that from this source we would see Yesh Chuppah L'Psulos. Rav Papa Omar Hai Tanahu. At this point, a new approach is taken. That's why we call Rav Papa's viewed as number two. The warning took place as she was an Arusa, and she went into private, and he gave her, the drinking took place after she was a Nesua. And this Tana is not bothered by Kodma Shchivas Baal Leboyel. So that once again, he had warned her when she was an arusa, she went into private, and he gave her to drink. Now, how did he give her to drink? You would have to say that there was they were in a chuppah. So we have the concept of tachasi sheikh with the chuppah, and as far as the requirement of kodma shchivas habal, which was raised as an objection to this explanation at the bottom of Omid Aleph by Rav Acho Bar Chanina. So this Tana doesn't require that. So in order to support this point, we had to say that this construction is according to the following: Tana Desanya Ein Mekanin Law Larusa Lashkoisa Kishi Arusa. Warning isn't given to an arusa with the anticipation of giving her to drink while she is still an arusa. But we can warn her not to be with so and so with the while she is still an arusa, in anticipation of her drinking when she is a nisua. And just to repeat ourselves, and we're emphasizing based on the Lishna Achrina and the Rashi that this Tana doesn't hold from the drosha of kodma shchivas habal, that the husband had to actually precede the paramour in intimacy. Number 3, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Omar al Yedei Gilgul. We take a look at Rashi. Rav Nachman Omar Masnisin Bidelo Kina Velo Istatra Kishi Arusa. The Tanaic source is not dealing with the case of the husband having warned her and her going into private while she was an arusa. Ela kino lo mishenisa. He warned her after he had married her. That's ve'istatra umekane lo ayadei kinoi shalachshav. So we're talking about basically the source is dealing with a standard case of nisuin, of a married, fully consummated marriage, husband and wife, and he warned her after they were married not to be with so and so, and he then brings her to drink through the kinui shalachshav, meaning the kinui that he made after she was in a suah. Umegalgel oleh shvua, and Megaga's role upon her. Now, the woman swears to her innocence in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, once the woman is swearing, we can now attach to that oath other matters that would not have been qualified as the initiation of an oath. But once a legitimate oath is imposed, we have the right to attach other matters that she has to swear to them as well. That's umegalgalel shvua kol yomim shoiso tachtov mishe nisarsa v'nivdeka umikan legilgul shvua min haTorah. We can force her to swear concerning other times, in these earlier times when she was attached to him, that had at those times she been wayward, i.e. while she was merely an arusa, had she been wayward, she would not be allowed to be with the husband. So the reference to arusa and shomeres yavam are references to earlier times that she is swearing through the power of Gilgul. And with that explanation, we don't run into the objection that Rav Acho Bar Chanina had raised. My only, let's say, reservation about this third approach is that I'm not sure that through this approach, once we're re-explaining Arusa, we're not necessarily seeing, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we're not necessarily seeing proof to Yesh Chupah L'Psulos. You can see we have a slash mark indicating that which follows is a new trend of thought. And on the side of the Gemara we have a no-say topic heading, Yevamos she'osa bo yavam maimer. Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Ruvain died leaving a widow. Shimon offers her money, mimer. We've discussed mimer many times in this Masechta already, but if you're a first-time listener, so we'll just briefly say that this is a rabbinic instrument where a Yavam can offer money to the Yevama, sort of starting off the Yibum process. Technically speaking, Rav in the Gemara actually insists on that being done. So you have a Yavam that gave money to the Yevama, and by the way, if a Yavam does that, so rabbinically, any of the other brothers are not allowed to marry her. The Yavam then gave her money, and there's another brother. So Shimon gave Ruvain's widow mimer money, and there happens to be Levi. Yadua shabias ochiv osur midrabanan. For Levi to have intimacy with her would be a rabbinic violation. Haim he nechsheves, is she considered mishtameres labia psula midrabanan? Ubekach nifseles me'achilas truma. Now, in order to appreciate this, one has to think out of the box a little bit. The Yevama, this widow of Ruvain, is on a Torah level is eligible to marry Shimon and or Levi. Shimon gave her money, but on a Torah level, Levi is there waiting in the balance. So even though Shimon is we'll say the rightful brother after his having given her money, but she's also the word waiting isn't exactly the best word, but she's a candidate, so to speak, to be done by Levi. So that having been said, we have a concept that we've discussed in the last couple of dapim, where there is we had the example in the Mishnah of a Kohen Gadol having done kiddushin with an almona, and does she become disqualified because the woman is waiting for the consummation of marriage by the Kohen Gadol, who is prohibited to marry her? Kohen Gadol, as opposed to a common Kohen Gadol, is not allowed to marry a widow. So we saw an opinion in the Mishnah, was Rabbi Meir's opinion, that a woman who's waiting for a Bia Psula becomes disqualified from Truma. The Yevama, in our case, where you've got Shimon having done Mimer and Levi waiting in the balance, that too might be described as a Mishtameres, Labia Psula Midorabonan. Does she become disqualified from Truma? So now let's continue with the one more point, the Mivneh, the structural note. We have diamonds that will appear. These are De'os B'divrei Rabbi Yochanan. These are opinions within Rabbi Yochanan. So now the Gemara. Sholach Rav Chanino Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chanino sent the following teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ha'oise Maimer B'Yavimtai. Using the names and the example we had before, Shimon offers money to Ruvain's widow. Ruvain died leaving no children. So Shimon is one of the surviving brothers. He gives her money. V'yeshlo ach, and he has a brother, Levi. Afilu hu kohen, v'hi kohenes. Even if he's a kohen, the brothers are kohanim, and she is the daughter of a kohen. Poslo min hatruma. She becomes disqualified from eating truma. If she's the daughter of a kohen, she's a kohenes. She, up till now, she would have been eligible to eat truma from her father's house. But during this, we'll say this interim period where Maimer was given to her by Shimon, and there's another brother eligible to marry her, midoraisa, but not midorabbanan. So until Shimon actually consummates the marriage, she, according to this teaching, is disqualified from Truma. The Gemara wants to clarify, Leman, according to whom? According to which Tanaic opinion is Rabbi Yochanan saying this? And this is a question, so we have a long question marking. E lema, and the double underline represents stages in trying to clarify according to whom was this teaching said. Rabbi Yochanan is an Amora, so we're trying to find a Tanaic authority upon which his comment is based. So, Lema the Rabbi Meir, if you say that Rabbi Yochanan is based on Rabbi Meir that we saw in the Mishnah, that the Kohen Gadol and his kiddushin with the almana renders her unfit to Truma, disqualifies her from Truma, the Gemara says, well, you can't say it's Rabbi Meir's opinion, that this Rabbi Yochanan comment is according to Rabbi Meir. Eimar diyamar Rabbi Meir. When is it that Rabbi Meir said, Mishtameres lebiya psula loy achla? A woman waiting for biya psula becomes disqualified, does not eat from Truma. Mido raisa, when the offense committed, the biya psula would be Pasal midoraisa. For example, a kohen gadol having intimacy with an almana. That's something the Torah prohibits. Derabanan mi omar. The fact that Levi is waiting for her, so to speak. If Levi would go ahead after Shimon did Maimer with her, Levi would consummate the Yibum marriage. That would be a rabbinic violation, not a Torah level violation. So it's hard to say that Rabbi Meir would be the basis of Rabbi Yochanan's stringent ruling. V'elo l'Rebbe Elazar of Rabbi Shimon. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan is in accordance with them. They had said that as long as intimacy did not take place between the Kohen Gadol and the widow back in the Mishnah, she is not disqualified. So, is Rabbi Yochanan's point in accordance with what they said? No, it's not likely that Rabbi Yochanan would say something according to them, because it would be terribly obvious. Mind you, where the woman is waiting, is awaiting biya psula on a intimacy that's prohibited on a Torah level. Achla, but nevertheless, she hasn't had the intimacy yet. She is allowed to eat truma. The Rabbana and Mibaya, where she's waiting for Levi, so to speak, which would be, at worst case scenario, only a rabbinic violation. All the more so, they would be lenient in allowing her to eat truma. Eloki also Ravin Omar. Ravin's role is to explain Rabbi Yochanan. That's why we have him in a diamond, number 2. So when Ravin came, Omar, he said, Asa bo maimer biyavimto, where Shimon offered her money, and there's another brother. Divrei HaKol. The Divrei HaKol is a reference to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish that we will see shortly. Everyone will agree, Achla. Even Rabbi Meir. There's a Rashi under the Gemara text, around 8 lines underneath that. Divrei HaKol, Bein Rabbi Yochanan, Bein Reish Lakish, Achla, she will eat B'truma de Bein Nasha, from Truma of her father's house, if she's a Bas Kohen. Daha Afilu le Rabbi Meir lo pasil. Even Rabbi Meir, who we saw in the Mishnah, wouldn't pasul ela b'sharas biya psul daraisa, only if she's waiting for a biya psul on a Torah level. But here, with that other brother in the picture, his biya would only be an isur derabanan, a rabbinic prohibition. So if Shimon gave her money, she continues eating truma. Yesh loy ach cholol. If the yavam that gave her money has a brother that is unfit for the kahuna, he's a cholol. In other words, their father had two wives. One wife produced Shimon, Reuven and Shimon, and the other wife was a divorcee who produced Levi. So Levi is a cholol. He is unfit on a Torah level to partake of truma. So she, the Yevama, with let's say a brother-in-law that's a cholol in the waiting in the wings, divrei hakol eina ochelos. Everyone will agree that she does not partake of truma. The Rashi elaborates on this. Divrei hakol lo ochla. Rashi, you'll see at the end of the medium-sized lines, afilu hi bas kohen, even if she's the daughter of a kohen, v'afagav the ovad bo maimer kohen kosher, even though Shimon was a kohen kosher, gave her money, akati mishtameres lebia psula, she is nevertheless considered in the position of waiting for a bia psula, lebia sacholol, the bia, the intimacy of the cholol, the havya psula doiraisa, v'lo ochla. Now, this idea of being pasul midoraisa, it would seem to me, it means that he, the cholol, is excluded from truma on a Torah level. V'afilu Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, ki machshri, even they who allow, in the case of the Mishnah, the almona l'kohen gadol kamachshri, that's in the case of an almona with a kohen gadol. Sheyesh lo ilachel b'mokam acher. That kohen gadol, if it wasn't with an almona, if it were a woman suitable for him, he would enable her to eat. He would merit her eating. Aval mishtameres liyavam cholol the ein lo la'achil. But one who's waiting for intimacy with a yavam who happens to be a cholol, he doesn't have the power to merit someone his wife's eating of truma. Dal kohen cholol zarhu. He is a zar. Posal law, v'lo ochla. If he would eventually have intimacy with her, he would make her into a chalola, disqualifying her on a Torah level from eating truma. So if that were the scenario where you've got Shimon and Levi, Levi happens to be a cholol, then everyone will agree that she, while she is a shemeres yavam, even though she received money, maimer from a kohen kosher, she will be disqualified. Again, based on this concept of shemeres, mishtameres will be a psula. Lo nechleku ela shenosan lo get. The machloikis between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, maybe we should note that originally we had cited Rabbi Yochanan's name, so we're referring to Rabbi Yochanan and his bar plukta Reish Lakish. They have a machlokes when the Kohen gave her a get. The Kohen had done maimer, but he also gave her a get. Now, a get with a Yevama, if you're a first-time listener, so then you're hearing for the first time that is a rabbinic instrument. It works only on a rabbinic level. That if a Yavam gives a Yevama a get, he cannot proceed further to do Yibum on a D'Rabbanan, on a rabbinic level. So our Kohen had given her a get. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Ocheles. Rabbi Yochanan says the fact that Yavam, the Kohen Yavam, had given her a get, that does not disqualify her from Truma. Reish Lakish Omar Eino Ocheles. Reish Lakish says she cannot. She doesn't eat Truma. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Ocheles. Afilu Rabbi Meir di Omar Eino Ocheles. Even according to Rabbi Meir, who was stringent in the Mishnah that as a result of kiddushin with someone puzzled to her, she does not eat hanimili mishtameres lebia psula d'oraisa. That's where she was waiting to consummate a marriage with someone that's unfit on a Torah level. Avol d'Rabbanan achla. A Yevama that receives a get, her prohibition to the Yavam is only on a rabbinic level. So that's not reason for her disqualification. It's not reason enough for her being disqualified from Truma. Reish Lakish says she stops eating. She becomes disqualified from Truma. Even according to them who are lenient in the Mishnah that said she was able to eat in the case of the Kohen Gadol and the Almona, who had done Kiddushin with her, Hani Mili, that is true that she is not disqualified by virtue of the fact that the Almona is waiting for the Kohen Gadol. He doesn't disqualify her because he grants under other circumstances the right to eat. A Kohen Gadol who would marry what the Torah prescribes him to marry. Aval hacha kevon di ein loy lahachil b'mokom acher loy. But here he doesn't have the power to grant truma rights in another situation. Now we have to go over this last point in a clearer fashion. The Gemara, when Reish Lakish says that even according to Rav Elazar and Shimon, where the Kohen Gadol is considered yesh la'achel b'makom acher through the mechanism that he's done over here. Here he was mekadesh and almona. That's a bad thing to do. But if he were mekadesh, if he betrothed a woman kosher for him, so it enables it on a Torah level. It's called kinyan kaspo. He grants her truma eating rights. Aval hacha, when you're dealing with a case of a get, the Yavam gave her a get. Nesinas haget never is the vehicle through which a woman becomes eligible to eating truma. So, since we're dealing with a case of get, this will be the basis of disqualification, even according to the lenient opinions of Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon. V'chitema hachanami yesh lo lahachila b'choizeres. You might say that even in the context of get, there is truma eating rights that are achieved. If we look in Rashi, second line from the bottom, V'im toimar hochanami yesh lo la'achil yidei gerushin gemurim b'chozeres dim hoya megarsha legamri hoysa chozeres lebeis avia v'cheles b'truma. If a man, let's say he was a non-Kohen, divorced a Bas Kohen, through the divorce she goes back to her father's house and picks up where she left off when she was single. She restarts her truma consumption by virtue of the fact she's the daughter of a Kohen. So that gerushin is a means of granting truma eating rights under that type of circumstance. So the Gemara says no, that doesn't qualify as being called yesh la'achil b'mokom acher. Chozeres poska minei. Through the case of Chozeres, she becomes detached from him, from the husband or the yavam that is divorcing her. The act of get is a discontinuation, a cutting off. And ukrova lebeinosha, she's related to her father's house. Aval ha agida bei. But here, in the case of the Kohen Gadol, correction. But here, in the case of the Yavam who gave her a get, she is still attached to him. So it's not parallel to the case of Chozeres. Hence, Reish Lakish takes the position that a Yavam, that even if he did Maimer with the Yevama, but then gave her a get, she is considered Mishtameres Lebia Psula, a Bia Psula, which is characterized as Ein Lo Lahachil B'Mokim Acher. Hence, she would become disqualified from the Truma. we should just mention, even though it may be obvious to most of you, when the Gemara says Ha'agidobe, the Yavam that gave her a get, she still is attached to the Yavam, because the only way to release a Yevama is through Chalitza. We said that the get is only an instrument on a rabbinic level, but Midorais, in order to release her, Chalitza would be necessary. The presence of the get, it's true, the get undoes the mimer, the money that was given to her, but that too was only rabbinic. So the rabbinic get undoes the rabbinic money given to her, but she still is attached to him, and hence it is not parallel to the case of a get that is responsible for her resuming truma consumption in her father's house, because there was paska mine. She was totally cut off from her husband. The Mishnah on Daf Nun Vav Amid Beis had said Nisarmalu o Nisgarshu v'chulei, and the Gemara, actually we should glance at the side, take advantage of our topic heading. The Nosei Yodua she mitzvahs kohen gadol. It is known that the mitzvah, the command of the commandment applying to a kohen gadol in his marriage is biktana oy nara v'loy boigeres. It's with a girl who has not reached the age of 12 and a half. Bogeres is a term, 12 and a half. Ktana is a girl up till age 12. A nara is from 12 to 12 and a half. This is what the Torah requires of a kohen gadol when he is choosing a wife. He's choosing a wife that is as a kohen gadol. Ma din kohen gadol she'ires ktana uvimeho erisin bogra. What would be the din of a kohen gadol who entered erusin with a girl that is suitable for him, a katana? But over the course of time, during, we'll say, the waiting period between erusin and nisuin, that is the waiting time between the initial betrothal and the consummation of the marriage, she reached the stage of bogeres. Mahu lekoinsa, can he take her in? Boser erusin azlinon, do we follow the erusin time and let that establish the halacha, and it was kosher then? Oy boser nisuin azlinon, or do we emphasize the time of nisuin, that establishes the tone of halacha, and he would not be able to take her in? We have a mivneh, structural note, where the triangle appears in two directions, the point facing up. This is, of course, with the two directions, a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of the give and take style. The point facing up, she'elah, question, and the inverted triangle, a response. The Gemara. Ba minei Rav Chia bar Yosef mishmuel. Rav Chia asks of Shmuel, kohen gadol shekidesh es haktana ubogro tachtov. A kohen gadol who gave money in marriage, in kiddushin and erusin of a girl, and she was still a ketana, she was kosher for him. Ubogro tachtov, and she became a boigeres. Boigeres is above the age of 12 and a half, so that if you know the beginning of Maseches Ksubis, so you know there that the time period for the marriage of a basula is 12 months, the time period between erusin and nisuin. So if he had done erusin with her just before she turned 12, by the time the nisuin takes place, she will have become a boigeres. So the kohen gadol was mekadesh iktana, and in the interim she became a bogeres. And we emphasize again, a kohen gadol is not allowed to initiate a marriage with a bogeres. Here he didn't initiate the initial stage of the stage of the marriage was not with her as a bogeres, but she became thus in the interim. Mahu, what is the din regarding, we're at the top of Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, what is the din with regard to taking her in, to consummate the marriage? Boser nisuin azlinon, do we follow the nisuin time period, and at that point she would be prohibited? Oy boser erusin azlinon, or do we emphasize the time of erusin? That's the question. Answer, Omar Lei, Shmuel's response to Nisuha. Let us conclude it from the Mishnah. Nisarmalu oy nisgarshu. The Mishnah continues with that which it had opened up with, where a Kohen was Mekadesh, a woman osir to him. So now they became almonas, the Kohen died or divorced her. Min hanisuin psulos. If the divorce is after they had achieved nisuin, so they're unfit. Min ha'erusin ksheros. If they are divorced from having reached only the erusin stage, so they are not disqualified. So what do we see from this? Rashi points this out, that we see that psul kahuna is established by nisuin. That namely, an almona that had reached erusin with a kohen gadol, forbidden type of marriage, and the kohen gadol died before the nisuin, she's not disqualified. So we see that nisuin is the determining factor regarding that which is prohibited or permitted with regard to laws of kahuna. So if that would be the case, a kohen gadol that did erusin with a kosher girl, that is the time of erusin she was kosher, but at the time of nisuin she's unfit, so he would not be allowed to take her in, because we look at things in terms of nisuin. Omar Lei. So in response to this answer, Rav Chia Bar Yosef says back to Shmuel, L'shavyo chalola lo komebaya li debio hi de meshavyo chalola. As far as the Mishnah is concerned, it speaks about psulos or not psulos or ksheros. When we speak about her becoming psula, as far as her becoming a chalola, that's a woman that had intimacy against the rules of kahuna. So in terms of establishing her as psula, there's no question. There's no question that the intimacy is that which establishes the status of chalola, and that was the topic of the Mishnah. My question, though, is not dealing with establishing a chalola. Ki komabayali. What I am asking is about the explanation of this pasuk in Vayikra Perek Chaf Aleph regarding a kohen gadol. It says, "V'hu isha bivsuleha yikach." The word yikach, it means the kohen gadol shall take a virgin woman. And when we speak about a basula, let us point out that a bogeres, a girl who reaches 12 and a half, even though she didn't experience intimacy, the fact that anatomically she is growing, and we call it the anatomical area of virginity under question, the opening there becomes, the aperture becomes wider, and hence she's not considered a besula anymore, even though it's not a function of losing virginity through intimacy. Nevertheless, through aging, if you will, through reaching 12 and a half, so the concept of besula with regard to a kohen gadol, she is no longer that. So the pasuk says that he shall take a besula. What does that mean, taking? Kicha de kiddushin bo'inan, oi kicha de nisuin bo'inan. Is it the kicha of kiddushin, the initial betrothal, or is the pasuk referring to kicha of nisuin, of consummation? Omar Lei, Shmuel responds, Ha nami tanisua. That too you can determine from a Tanaic source. It says, Ires es almona, a regular kohen who did erusin with an almona. That's okay. That's kosher. V'nisman eliyois kohen gadol, and after he betrothed the widow, he was appointed to be a kohen gadol. yichnois, he is allowed to take her in, to consummate the marriage. What do we see? We see that we emphasize the point of time of erusin. So, if that be the case, so then back to our original question about a kohen gadol that did kiddushin or erusin with a basula, and before the nisuin she became a bogeres, we wouldn't emphasize the fact that she became a bogeres at the point of nisuin, because at the point of erusin she was still a ktana and kosher to the kohen gadol. The Gemara responds, so it could be Reb Chia Bar Yosef responds to Shmuel, and he says, that's not a good source for my issue. Shiny Hassam. Dichtiv. There it's different because the pasuk says, Ki'im besula bi'amov yikach isha. Namely, the case of erusin with an almona is different because you have exeris hakosov, which makes that possible. The Rashi points out that the word isha is a kro yasera, and from this extra word we include that a kohen hedyot, a standard kohen, a common kohen that was mikadesh and almona, and he became appointed later as a kohen gadol, he can take her in. The Gemara asks, well, hachanami ksiv isha, but in the same context we're dealing with a kohen gadol, and you have the word isha, so let it apply also to the kohen gadol that was mekadesh the ketana, and in the interim she became a bogeres, and let it be okay. The Gemara says you can't include another case of leniency. Achas v'lo shtayim. We can be marbe. We can include one case, an additional case of leniency, but not two. The Gemara asks, Ma rois, what is it that you see to choose the case of almona betrothed by a kohen hedyot that can be taken in by the kohen hedyot who becomes appointed as a kohen gadol, and we don't include the case of the ketana who became a bogeres? The Gemara answers, I'll tell you why. The case of the bogeres, ishtani gufa. There was a physical, anatomical change to her body. It's a very significant change. She's not the same as she was before. She went from ketana to bogeres, which involves a physical change. In the case of the almona that was betrothed by the kohen hedyot, who later was appointed as kohen gadol, lo ishtani gufa. There wasn't a change, so it's not as radical a leniency, and therefore we don't include that case. So to rely, let us say, on Shmuel's answer to allow the kohen gadol to consummate the marriage with her as a bogeres, we cannot conclude that from over here.